Admiral Nelson of the Red Dawn never let his tension show to his subordinates. He left that to the AI scenarios he ran in private in the Hollow Suite, using the estimated power of the Co-starships to create battle scenarios. Defeat after defeat by the ascended Co had 9 worlds overrun and occupied by those who styled themselves as gods by the time his armada, which he'd built on the move, even turned around. Admiral Pike was on the way to the same destination as himself, but as of right now it appeared she would have to divert her path to start recapturing occupied worlds. The population is committed now, but if we're humiliated at this stage, what good will all our previous victories do? That was the great concern. Other peoples were growing in power. Smaller nation-states and empires were being gobbled up by their neighbors, and according to the leading military experts and their advisors, it wouldn't be long before the Republic of Man could be rivaled by some fairly aggressive neighbors. Humiliation before them? Occupied worlds given back only with meek pleading and supplication? Armadas broken so badly that it would take decades to rebuild? We may as well lie down before our neighbors and hope they are not too rough with us. How long until we get there? He asked his navigation officer. 3 more months, sir. She answered with quiet dread. He hadn't forbidden the running of simulations against the Co, other than the ones that were official in nature. But if they had, and he was sure they had, they knew what he knew. That the Co Armada was more powerful than anything else humanity had ever faced. He recalled the words of the president. Never surrender to humiliation. They hate our pride. For no one can be free and humiliated at once. They demand we call them gods, that we bow and scrape to beg forgiveness for our liberty, but I will not. We will not. We touched the face of God hundreds of years ago when we took to the stars, and we will never bow and scrape again. Fight them to the last drop of blood, until they feel a very human chill in their alien bodies and know that they are not gods, and they can die. Say what he would of the president. Nelson hadn't voted for him, but the man knew how to give a rousing speech, and he understood the danger in a grander sense than most others as far as the captain could tell. Losing a planet was a problem. Losing a war was a disaster. Present position of the Co Armada? He asked. On the way to conquer their 12th world, a place called the Vale. She answered. He ignored her assumption that the Co would win, but scratched his chin. Why does that name sound familiar? He asked. It tickled a memory somewhere in his brain. That's the common name for it. She answered. Its formal name is Valetudinaria. The colony is settled mostly by military veterans who found it hard to adapt to civilian life. Recognition snapped into his mind. Everybody knew that colony. At least every military person. It offered free land and a modular home for every veteran willing to settle there and donate 1 day a week of work to terraforming an unsettled region. It was famous for its mountains and its beautiful, peaceful scenery. Surprisingly, it even welcomed veterans from the Sacred Dark, the Ediaxa, and other conquered species. A soldier is a soldier, was the attitude of their governor, a retired general whose name escaped him at the moment. More famously than their residents, however, was the highly militaristic culture that governed the planet. A little smile was on his face for the first time in weeks. Sir? His navigation officer asked. Is everything all right? Oh yes, everything is fine. I was just feeling sorry for them. Captain Nelson answered. For the planet? She asked with a sage nod. No, he replied. For the Co. Admiral Vorksa watched the Terran starbase crumble under withering fire. It, like most of their defenses, had been pathetic, far too weak to be worth much. So far, there hadn't even been a viable fleet to oppose him or his people. Ground defenses were light, too, with only a handful of police and a few militia organized by the local recruiting stations for their military. Citizen militia were armed, and there had been casualties. Darkness, damn them! There had been casualties. However, world by world, the Terran Republic gave way to the divinity of the Ascended Co. But there was a problem. Why don't they give in? He growled and tensed the finger claws of his hands which held onto his seat. That question was being debated heavily among the council. The one-time heretics of the Intakana had defied the divine will of the Ko. It had taken only a handful of battles to bring them back into the fold. The Bavragan needed only one battle to know never to encroach. And yet, they have 50 worlds and we've taken almost 1/5 of them. How can they not know they're beaten? He asked himself that a great deal, even on the worlds that were occupied, handfuls of humans continued to resist, hiding in the larger population and inflicting small acts of sabotage and murder. Begin the landing operation. Seize this Veil world. I want it brought to heel in 5 days. He ordered the troop transports to begin and watched them descend on the world below. The fleet would be held here while it was taken, but a few days of rest would be good for the fleet before moving on. 3 weeks later, he sat slumped in his chair looking at the latest disaster report. How exactly did they ambush us this time? He asked. They defecated on our life sensors to give the illusion of large numbers and laid something they call booby traps everywhere to kill those who came to capture or kill the imaginary army. The exhausted face of the co-ground leader was only a hint of the deep frustration that was being felt by the ones who actually go out and fight the maniacs. He exhaled hard. 2 days before, it had been balloons of military equipment over top of generators to give a false heat signature. Before that, it had been disguising themselves using the skins of animals to get close. Before that, it had been secretly filling artillery with concrete in the middle of the night and then provoking a counterfire. And on top of that, it seemed there was a gun behind every rock and blade of grass. We are gods. Have we finally found devils? The Admiral wondered as the chill ran down his spine. Should we split the fleet? That was the 9th time that had been asked in the last month. Admiral Vorksa glanced at the screen. The world below was in ruins. It hadn't had major cities, but those small ones it held were now more or less flattened. He swiped his hand in front of the screen and the camera began to pan. Valleys that once had a small river were now still flooding. I can't believe they lured us in there and then detonated their own dam. 3,000 gods had died that day, with more requiring bodily augmentation to live functional lives, and then there was all that precious equipment. Somehow they'd stumbled upon a massive human army, and they weren't even halfway to the Sol system. No, they are only human. If we leave, then we are saying we are struggling, and gods do not struggle. They are merely stubborn Zeti burrowing deep within the dirt to avoid being stomped on. If we dig them out of their nests, they will die quickly. We need only keep doing as we do, without being foolish about it, and we will win. The Admiral's words usually would have resulted in echoed approval, but now? Sir, with respect, are we not being reckless? We have lost more in this one battle than we have lost in all divine punishments in the last 5,000 years. This race, it is mad, crazed, beyond reason. We are deep within their territory. The first officer's concerns were quashed at once when Admiral Vorksa slammed his fist upon the table. And we will go deeper. They will crumble. We need only keep pushing them until they surrender. Then from here we will move on from world to world until we reach their home system. Then, when we have captured Sol, and they bend in worship to us and accept their natural place beneath their gods, we will be able to go home again. I understand that, sir, but they have 3 armadas en route to us now. The first officer objected again, and this prompted the scales of the other co-officers to rattle. Objecting once was one thing, but twice. Vorksa's scales began to turn red with anger. What of it? He demanded. As I tried to say, sir, this came in at the start of this cycle. The first officer committed another breach of protocol and swiped the screen away, instead bringing up a transmission. They land! They come back! They come back! It was a meaningless message until the first officer brought up the stellar map again and pointed to the world of origin, and the co-signal transmission stopped. The humans retook a world we took from them. They send transports from 5 or 6 worlds around our occupations, and are descending on others. They are winning back what we have conquered, and still their fleet comes on, while we sit here fighting on a world that has nothing on it to fight over, except for who controls it. The first officer's words created a rattle in the scales of all the present gods. This world does not matter. To humiliate the Terran Empire, we must take Seoul. Fighting over this world is pointless except that we have already begun it. We need to move, the first officer declared, and Vorksa sat sullen and displeased as he looked at the stellar map. No. If we destroy their armadas, that will break them. They must be exhausted already from losing to us. One more victory and we are triumphant, the admiral declared, and a rumbling of approval finally was delivered as it should have been. As if we need fear defeat. We are gods. What are these but mere apes of a backwater world? His scales rattled in disgust as he went about approving new operations to hunt down the local resistance. They'll run out of tricks soon enough. We only have to keep going, he told himself as his confidence reasserted itself again. I would give a long speech to you about your bravery and courage and the fight for our future, but there's no need for that. President Brown said in front of the line of ships. You are brave, and for the brave, a few words are as good as many. Go, fight, destroy the Co. And whether you come back or not, you will live forever in our memories, and forever in their nightmares. Hurrah! 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 The voices of the tens of thousands of crew members went up. Space Marines in their customary black armor raised up their guns, pumping their arms with every cheer. They came from all corners of the Republic, and their war cries and dread vision dominated the screens, not just within the Republic itself, but outside of the Republic where curious onlookers expected to watch the nascent power of the Terran Republic crumble to dust before being swept into the ashbin of history. But it made a very fine moment, no matter the expectations of the onlookers. The ships were the latest models of battleship. They'd taken even longer than usual to build because the designs had to be updated halfway through the construction. John ran a hand through his hair as soon as the cameras were gone. More of it was white than before, he knew, because he could see it reflected in the hull of the nearest battleship. I swear I gained a new white hair every single day after that decision to upgrade the fleet. He thought to himself as he suppressed the shaking of his body, channeling it instead into his relentless work ethic. As the soldiers boarded their respective battleships, he made his way to a private office. Transmissions were waiting for him already. Give up these systems without a fight, and we will take no more. Just a few territories, and we will have peace. There will be peace in our time, if we only have a little more. It is a small price to pay, isn't it? There were dozens of them from surrounding governments. Some of them were very small, relative to the Republic. Some of them were much larger, rivaling the Republic in size or surpassing it. None had declared war. Yet. But with the loss of 12 worlds thus far, and the promise of losing more before a proper fight in the stars could even be made, I feel like a wounded lion just watching buzzards circling overhead. They are waiting for me to die and all my strength to be useless before they come down to tear me apart. He thought as he crafted his responses with care. To the weakest places that were trying to just snip off an opportunistic corner of the Republic, he sent outright refusals. To the others he sent no response, except an offer of trade agreements, while quietly routing a warning to the Senate to fund the building of more armed starbases at hyperlane choke points. We're spending on a deficit right now. We can't do that forever. But if we stop now, we may as well lie down and lick boot. We're finished, John told himself, and down to his soul, he knew he was right. The battle ahead would decide what would happen for humanity, and the weight he felt on him was such in that moment that he was glad he was sitting down. He reached for a bottle and popped a pill. The pain there went away, at least for the moment. But it would be back, just like the endless demands. And his console went off again, revealing that a group of pirates was settling up in an area where the local militia had been broken and was threatening to link up with planetary crime lords to create their own little ideal domain. This is how nations die. They need more than they can create, and they exhaust themselves. The thought passed briefly through the president's mind before he began working out a solution to answer the local governor's concerns. Admiral Pike clung to her sense of reason as the sunless days continued on board her flagship. Every time we think we're safe, it gets worse. she thought as she sat up in bed, her black skin beaded with sweat despite the environmental controls meant to make her quarters comfortable. The sweat had nothing to do with the temperature, it was the dreams again. For near the entirety of President Brown's administration, the war had continued onward, and it was draining them all. Defeating the Intakana Confederation had provided some relief, but the Bavragan mercenaries had opened the door to an invasion by the Ascended Co, and they seemed unstoppable. Over 20% of Terran Republic worlds were occupied, only finally stopped by a unique problem that nobody believed would stop them for much longer. And everybody was just tired. We're so damn tired. Starship crews are supposed to cycle out into periods of rest to get planetside every now and then. Nobody is supposed to fight this long. She thought, and tried to recall the particulars of her nightmare. She knew she wasn't the only one suffering from this wartime fatigue. The counselors now had counselors of their own, and the drills had to be cut in half just to provide extra downtime in order to keep the crew as energized as they were. That was merciful in a way. She looked as bad as the rest of them. We're all in the same shit, and that makes it easier to bear, she thought as she rose and began to clean herself up to get ready for another long shift. A communication indicator came on, and the computer relayed the details without her asking for it. This is Captain Nelson of the Red Dawn. Ma'am, it's good to be in Instacom reach with you again. Task Force return will be arriving at Sector Sigma for our rendezvous in 30 days. With luck, we'll arrive on the same day as you and Task Force Liberty. The younger captain's voice was not much less exhausted than her own, but she made no comment about that, instead saying, "Tell me the truth. What do you think our chances are? If we catch them with their pants down trying to take another shit on one of our worlds?" he asked. It was crude. It was out of regulation. It was unprofessional, and it felt absolutely right. It was also fair to ask, after all, it was still possible the Co might choose to abandon conquest of the world below them and instead choose to attack a softer target. Chasing after them seemed somehow worse. Her lack of response to his question seemed to suffice for an answer in his mind, and he answered the Admiral with a more dignified and professional stoicism. "I don't know, I really don't. I've never met Admiral Yi before, but he's supposedly a genius tactician, and we certainly have the numbers on them. Our fleets are the best they can possibly be." "Under the circumstances," she interjected. "Under the circumstances," he admitted before going on, tacitly acknowledging the exhaustion of his own crew after a 7-year war that had turned disastrously wrong right when it seemed it might end. "I've gone over the plan as thoroughly as you have, ma'am, and even outnumbering them 5-1. I just don't know." "Yi sent out something yesterday. Did you receive it?" she asked. "Yes. He said we have an advantage they don't have, and we're going to use that to force them to retreat." Captain Nelson cleared his throat and said, "We know how to lose." It made no sense to me. I hoped you'd know what he meant, I sure don't. But on another note, you're being promoted to Admiral. Congratulations. She said it so offhandedly that he almost missed it. The weariness of his mind was such that he barely registered it as a positive. "Thank you, Admiral." He said it without enthusiasm. "I'll try to live up to the rank." "I know." She replied to him at once, similarly nonplussed. Numb was now their new normal, and as such, she hadn't expected a cheer, and nobody was doing ceremonies for anything anymore. "I'll see you when we reach the Veil, and hopefully, I'll see you on the other side of it," she said as solemnly, and killed her transmission side. "Same to you, Admiral." He answered, and killed his side, thus completing the termination of their link. Day slipped into day with a kind of blessed monotony for the rest of the month, as news continued to come out about the situation on planet Valetudinaria. The Co-soldiers continued to land, and there were no more major settlements unoccupied. However, much to the relief of the Terran Republic, the Co had no interest in taking slaves, nor in massacring the inhabitants. They came, they fought, and almost seemed to follow a Republic model of rules of war, with no conception of how to fight a dirty war. A failing that allowed the colonists to continue to resist in the hinterlands or in the occupied settlements, but the Co were still winning. It was just slow. President John Brown seemed almost beyond the very concept of exhaustion to those who knew him. Each day he rose, went before the Senate, proposed solutions and allocations of resources regarding problems, and otherwise displayed no hint that he was troubled by the conflict. No hint but one. His hair was turning whiter by the day, as if every problem slew a follicle. As if he was drawing on the years of his life for strength, he continued his nightly broadcast. "We are not defeated until we surrender, and if we never surrender, we are never beaten." He'd said it 1,000 times, it seemed, but little by little its efficacy waned, and really it was only the resistance of the veil that held humanity together at this stage. "If we lose this, the Senate will force my hand." He pursed his lips as he straightened up his suit with a slight tug at the base of his coat. Committed as he was to the Republic, he often couldn't help but think, no wonder people like dictatorships. The decision is made and it's done. No compromise necessary when you know you're right. He shook his head, frowning at his own impure thought. We fight to the bitter end, whatever that means. He resolved and left his office to go and get to work again. Admiral Yi watched the map of systems continue to shrink as the task force closed in on their destination. The Veil existed in a unique system, and the unique system had created a unique world, one tailor-made for those who knew it well. He showed no sign of weariness. His forces were fresh and, though untried, he drilled them relentlessly and uncompromisingly on the known data of the Co warships. The Co have very advanced ships, but they have no true conception of what it is to fight a long war, nor do they know what it is to lose. The warrior heritage of humankind was deep and wide as an ocean, born from the first moment two cavemen picked up rocks to slaughter one another with, and only growing greater as time had gone on. By contrast, in all his studies of the ascended Co, they were used to showing up, winning a battle by overwhelming might, and then having demonstrated the uselessness of resistance, returned home to receive worship and tithes from their puppets. When the hyperlane was close on his monitor, he only nodded at his navigation officer. Go. It wasn't a grand speech, it was just an order. That was all it took for the sailor of the void to act, and the stars became blurs as his fleet rushed to link arms with his counterparts into one single whole that was 3 times the size of the one that had brought the sacred dark to heel years before. It would have been impressive if it hadn't been backed by war bonds and debt spending that would take 20 years to repay if they were lucky. Better in debt than in the grave, Yi thought, and on his screen the 2 faces of his counterparts appeared. Admiral, they all said at once, and a rare smile touched their 3 faces in the same moment. Do you think they know we're coming? Admiral Pike asked. I don't see how they couldn't, but they're so hidebound by their own rules that they haven't moved their fleet out of position to meet us at the hyperlane exit. I think they won't move until we show up. Once we do, they'll leave planetary orbit to keep us from targeting their ground troops. Correct. Yi agreed with a nod. Just remember, stick to the plan. Do not move in until I give the order. I know it is counterintuitive, but you will have to trust me. Admiral Nelson and Admiral Polk both inhaled deeply through their nostrils, then gave reluctant nods of their own. All we can do is go forward and hope for the best. There's no more planning to be done. There's only do or die, Admiral Pike added, but Admiral Nelson chuckled a little, drawing curious expressions from both Yi and Pike alike. Not exactly. Do and die is also an option, he said, and began a long, dark laugh at his own gallows humor. It spread from him to his counterparts, and for the first time in a long time, they had much-needed laughs of their own, before they killed their lynx and set a course to see what would happen next.